So I in particular work with a lot of people relocating to Chicago with their jobs. And they're learning about the Chicago market, how much rents are. Sometimes they vacillate between renting or purchasing. Can you go over a little bit as far as the interest rates and where they're at now and what to expect?
Absolutely. So interest rates, they change, daily and sometimes in the middle of the day, weekly, monthly, and so on. There's constantly this ebb and flow of it. And sometimes people will maybe see something online or billboard or whatever. It'll have a rate on one day, then the next week it might be a little higher, and it's like, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. What are we going to do? What I try and tell everybody to calm their minds is if you zoom out a little bit and look at maybe the month or 6 months or 6 years or whatever it might be, you'll notice on these charts that historically rates were like this, and then now we're in this part way down here. So with how low interest rates are, the difference between an eighth of a percent or a quarter of a percent or so on, depending on how much money you're borrowing, it might be $50. It might be like $30. So I try and let buyers know, hey, listen, I want to be very direct here. If we start looking now and rates are here, and then maybe 3, 4, 5 months later you want to buy and they're an eighth or quarter difference, just because that's where the market is. If your payment, increasing or changing by $20 is going to bankrupt you, like you probably shouldn't buy anyways.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because taxes go up sometimes. Assessments, there's things that happen to where if a tiny little increase, if that's not comfortable, then maybe you should reevaluate buying, right? Maybe rent it for another year. But the best part about it, mathematically, as we heard about here, is that since we're stretching this money out over such a long time, that the little changes here or there, rarely it's not going to blow your payment up. But then also it's not going to make it plummet, Right. I've had people call me and, oh, Michael, hey, I noticed rates have dropped here. How does that affect my payment, right? It's going to go down like $500. Do the math. Yeah, it's like $18. Like, oh, so, which is good. It adds up.
Yeah, but it's smart to always be following the market and seeing where it's at. I remember when I purchased my first home, it was at 8%. And then all of a sudden, it was like a year and a half later, it was down to 6%. And I actually ended up saving like $400 or $500 per month. And just to go back to our earlier point, you could be adding that towards the principal, and that adds up very quickly.
Absolutely.
Obviously, a couple of years ago, interest rates were like at an all-time low. I mean, from that 8%, they were basically cut that in half. Are interest rates continuing to climb right now? Like, do you recommend this summer potentially being a great time to buy with an election year coming next year? I mean, what would be your forecast a little bit on the market?
Yeah, very good question here. So I've noticed on the news and everything, I try and stay on top of the markets and all that, but also you get into election years and whatever. So to touch on that for one moment, you always hear in the news that, oh my gosh, this election, this is going to be the end all be all, or this is going to be the one, or that happens every 4 years. Right. So they all can't be the one, you know what I mean? So again, there's ebbs and flows and all that.
No, but we saw what happened with the stock market.
Yes, that is correct.
So
that's true.
maybe real estate is the safer purchase during an election.
Absolutely. that is definitely a good point. So the interest rates that people commonly get are backed by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. They're the largest providers in the country. And a lot of that has to do not with directly with the stock markets, the financials, and so on. They kind of have an inverse relationship.
Right.
So if you ever notice, when the NASDAQ, the Dow, the S&P, and all that, when those are on fire, if all the investors in the world, where do they put their money? They put it there, right? That's
and not as much in the housing market.
Exactly. And then not as there's something called the T-bill, the 10-year, and all that kind of synonyms. So they don't put money there. That is much more directly tied to mortgage rates. So if you think of, again, like a teeter-totter at a playground, when the stock market and all the financials are just absolutely amazingly on fire, that does not help mortgage interest rates, okay? A couple years ago when you mentioned that kind of bottoming out, it was the flip of that teeter-totter.
Right.
It was right around when Brexit was going to happen, which still hasn't even happened now. That was like years ago. But during that time period, people thought that the markets here were absolutely on the toilet. So no one was putting money in the financials. Therefore, they were putting it in the safer investment, which then mortgage rates were amazing. So obviously that's not good for your 401k and your retirements and all that. But again, there's constantly this teeter-totter of the financial markets and then how that affects mortgage rates. But again, we're talking about an 8, a quarter, like up or down, where there's no scenario, almost no scenario, where if you're getting a 4% and then a couple months later you're getting an 8% or 7 or 6 or even a 5, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I always tell people, listen, once we come up with a payment range and interest rate range for you, it's going to be within $20 a year, $30 a year, something like that. It's never hundreds and hundreds of dollars. That would just be, that would be very, very insane. So.
Good to know.